Why do deeper thinkers often suffer more? Why does heightened awareness, something we're told is a virtue, so often lead to alienation, despair, or paralysis? The more clearly you see the world, the harder it becomes to look away from its chaos, and your own. Arthur Schopenhauer believed that life, in its rawest form, is not a gift, but a curse to endure. That consciousness, while powerful, intensifies our experience of suffering, and that behind all our striving, all our desires, lies a blind force, the will that uses us, consumes us, and discards us. But there's another side to this darkness. In the silence that follows suffering, Schopenhauer discovered something else: art, beauty, compassion, and detachment. The potential to transcend, not by overpowering the world, but by stepping back from it. His pessimism wasn't an excuse to surrender. It was a strategy to survive. And yet, Friedrich Nietzsche would challenge all of this. Where Schopenhauer saw escape and denial of the will, Nietzsche saw weakness. Where Schopenhauer taught quiet withdrawal, Nietzsche roared with affirmation. He believed that suffering isn't just unavoidable, it's necessary. That pain is the crucible in which strength is forged. In this episode, we'll explore the psychological cost of consciousness through Schopenhauer's eyes, and the defiant response Nietzsche offered in return. You'll see how both thinkers confront suffering, meaning, and the individual's role in a chaotic world. And you'll learn how to take the best from both. Not to choose between pessimism and optimism, but to understand the essence of each. The mind is a labyrinth. Let's walk its shadows together. What happens when a mind becomes too awake? Arthur Schopenhauer, one of the most radical pessimists in Western philosophy, believed that the more intelligent a person is, the more they suffer. Why? Because intelligence sharpens perception. It cuts through illusions. It exposes the absurdity behind our daily routines, the futility behind our ambitions, and the inherent cruelty woven into existence itself. According to Schopenhauer, what drives human life is not reason or virtue, but the will. Not your will, not a divine will, but a blind, irrational force that pulses through all of nature. The will to live, to strive, to persist. It animates all things, plants reaching toward the sun, animals hunting prey, humans chasing pleasure, power, validation. But this will never rests. It's never satisfied. It devours us from within, pushing us into constant craving, and then abandoning us in disappointment. The moment we satisfy one desire, another takes its place. Schopenhauer saw this as the root of suffering, an endless cycle of wanting, grasping, failing, and beginning again. And those who see this cycle clearly, they suffer more. Not because the world hurts them more, but because they can no longer be comforted by delusion. They no longer believe in the promises of society, religion, or success. They see through them, and in doing so, become estranged from the world. For Schopenhauer, intelligence creates distance. It isolates the thinker from the herd. The more you understand, the more alone you feel. It's not arrogance. It's alienation. A mind that questions too deeply finds fewer and fewer answers that satisfy. The conversations become emptier, the rituals meaningless, the smiles rehearsed. And this isn't just a philosophical position, it's a psychological reality. When you begin to see the will operating in others, it becomes harder to connect with them. You watch people chase after things, status, relationships, distractions, with such conviction, while knowing deep down they're serving a mechanism that doesn't care for their fulfillment. The tragedy isn't that people suffer. It's that most don't even understand why. And once you do, you become a kind of ghost in the system. Still moving through life, but no longer belonging to it. This burden is compounded by the fact that most people don't want to hear the truth. Schopenhauer didn't just suffer because of the will, he suffered because he was awake to it. And that awareness became a kind of exile. He described life as a pendulum swinging between pain and boredom, between the frustration of unfulfilled desires and the emptiness that follows their achievement. In his view, happiness was not a sustainable state, but a temporary pause between waves of suffering. And even that pause, if it lasts too long, becomes intolerable in its own way. We are not built for peace. We are built to want. This is a deeply unsettling insight because it calls into question not just what we pursue, but the structure of existence itself. If suffering isn't accidental, but fundamental, then any attempt to eliminate it through progress, wealth, or ideology is doomed to fail. And to see this clearly is to lose faith in the entire human project. Yet paradoxically, in his writing there's a strange peace, a recognition that once the veil is lifted and the machinery of desire is laid bare, you can begin to stop chasing. You can begin to look inward. But that inward turn doesn't start with serenity. It starts with despair. And Schopenhauer, more than anyone, was willing to sit in that darkness. If you're liking this video, please like and subscribe now. It helps the channel to grow. Thanks for your support. If existence is defined by blind striving and unavoidable suffering, then how do we live without succumbing to despair? For Schopenhauer, the answer isn't to fight the will, but to see it, understand it, and then quietly withdraw from its grip. Where others preach struggle or victory, Schopenhauer advocates detachment. His path isn't one of conquest, but of transcendence. The world cannot be fixed, he argues, but your relationship to it can. So how does one escape the will? One of Schopenhauer's most radical proposals is that aesthetic experience, the deep, immersive engagement with art, music, and beauty, offers a temporary liberation from suffering. When we lose ourselves in a painting, a song, or the stillness of a winter landscape, something shifts. The relentless ego, with all its cravings and fears, dissolves. Time slows, desire fades, and for a moment, we stop wanting and simply perceive. In those rare moments of pure contemplation, the will is silenced. Art becomes more than decoration. It becomes salvation, not because it solves anything, but because it interrupts the cycle of craving. It opens a space inside us that isn't ruled by survival or ambition. And in that space, we experience a kind of inner freedom, a glimpse into a life unchained from the will. But it's not just art. Schopenhauer believed that compassion, the ability to see oneself in the suffering of others, is another way we can distance ourselves from the tyranny of desire. When we act compassionately, we suspend the ego. We step outside the machinery of self-interest, even briefly. In a world built on competition and scarcity, compassion is an act of quiet rebellion. It's a refusal to see life solely through the lens of the will. And yet Schopenhauer is no romantic. He doesn't believe in utopias or in the perfectibility of mankind. He knows these moments of transcendence are fleeting, but their impermanence doesn't make them meaningless. Quite the opposite. Their rarity is what makes them sacred. So what does this look like in practice? Schopenhauer's vision of a wise life is one of voluntary simplicity, not as an aesthetic trend or a moral posture, but as a psychological necessity. Strip away the excess. Reduce your wants. Embrace stillness. Not because you hate life, but because you understand its structure and refuse to be devoured by it. Live more like a monk than a merchant, not to reject the world entirely, but to relate to it on different terms. This doesn't mean isolation for the sake of superiority. Schopenhauer wasn't advocating for elitist detachment. His solitude was rooted in realism, not arrogance. He saw that most suffering is self-inflicted, not through malice but through unconscious servitude to the will. And his solution wasn't to escape the world physically, but to detach internally, to stop reacting, to stop craving, to stop participating in the endless loop of more. Ironically, this kind of detachment doesn't deaden you, it awakens you. Because in that quiet, you start to notice things that striving had hidden: subtle beauty, unforced kindness, moments of clarity, softness without fear. You begin to observe the world not as a battleground, but as a reflection of your own interior noise. And slowly, as that noise dies down, so does the will's power over you. Schopenhauer never promised happiness, but he pointed to something deeper: freedom from illusion, a kind of sober, peaceful awareness that isn't about triumph but about truth. It doesn't make life easy, but it makes it honest. And in a world of deception, honesty might be the most radical act of all. Where Schopenhauer saw salvation in retreat, Friedrich Nietzsche saw danger. To him, Schopenhauer's detachment from the will wasn't a path to transcendence. It was a surrender, a slow spiritual suicide masquerading as wisdom. Nietzsche did not deny suffering. Instead, he viewed it as an inevitable and necessary part of life. For Nietzsche, the great sin isn't pain, it's resentment, the kind that festers in the hearts of those who are too afraid to confront life directly. He called this state ressentiment, a toxic moral inversion, where weakness dresses up as virtue and failure disguises itself as righteousness. In ressentiment, the individual is too powerless to create, so they choose to deny. They reject life not because it is unworthy, but because they fear they cannot meet it on their own terms. Nietzsche saw this in asceticism, in the rejection of desire, in the retreat from the world. He saw it in Schopenhauer's disdain for the will, and in religious ideologies that glorified meekness and self-denial. To Nietzsche, these were symptoms of spiritual fatigue, not transcendence, but capitulation. Instead of denying the will, Nietzsche proposed something radical: affirm it. Affirm everything: pain, failure, chaos, even death, not because they are pleasant, but because they are real, because they are the materials from which meaning is built. His philosophy was not about escaping suffering, but transforming it into power. This is the essence of Nietzsche's concept of Amor Fati, love of fate. It is the commitment to embrace life exactly as it is, without wishing it were different. Not resignation, but fierce acceptance. Even the most painful events are not obstacles to meaning. They are meaning. The fire is not what destroys you. It is what forges you. At the heart of this affirmation stands Nietzsche's most famous figure, the Übermensch, or Overman. The Übermensch is not a Superman in the comic book sense. He is a symbol, a direction, not a destination. The Übermensch is one who has overcome the limitations of herd morality, religious guilt, and nihilistic despair. He has stared into the abyss and carved a self out of chaos. He creates his own values. He gives his own life meaning. Not by escaping the will, but by learning to ride it. This is where Nietzsche diverges sharply from Schopenhauer. Where Schopenhauer seeks relief through negation, Nietzsche seeks transformation through affirmation. He does not ask you to quiet the will. He asks you to harness it, shape it into strength, art, courage, and defiant joy. His vision is not of detachment but of intensity, not silence but symphony. And yet Nietzsche's path is not easy. To affirm life in this way is not about pleasure or comfort. It's about responsibility. Radical, brutal responsibility for your existence. No one is coming to save you. No moral system will hand you the answers. You must become the author of your own meaning, knowing that the world owes you nothing. This, for Nietzsche, is the highest act of human power. Not to be free from suffering, but to look suffering in the eye and say, I choose you. To take the raw, unfiltered chaos of existence and shape it into something worthy, not in spite of its pain, but because of it. In that act of creation, Nietzsche believed, we become more than victims of life. We become participants in it, and through that participation, we become something rare. Not perfect, not invulnerable, but awake. At first glance, Schopenhauer and Nietzsche seem irreconcilable. The former retreats from the world, the latter charges into it. The former teaches us to quiet the will, the latter demands we embrace it. But what if they aren't opposites, but complements? What if true philosophical resilience isn't about choosing between them, but weaving their visions together? Both thinkers begin with the same insight. Life is suffering. But from there, they diverge. Schopenhauer sees this suffering as intrinsic to the structure of existence, a loop of desire and dissatisfaction that can only be broken through detachment. Nietzsche, on the other hand, sees that very suffering as the fuel for strength, creation, and self-overcoming. But here's where things get interesting. Schopenhauer gives us the clarity to see. Nietzsche gives us the fire to respond. Taken together, they form a psychological toolkit for those who are awake to the tragedy of life, but still determined to shape something beautiful from it. Schopenhauer teaches us to slow down, to observe the machinery of craving, to recognize the traps we fall into when we blindly obey the will. His worldview strips away comforting illusions, not to paralyze us, but to liberate us from false hopes, from expectations that only deepen our suffering. Nietzsche then picks up where Schopenhauer stops. He doesn't undo the insight, he builds on it. Once the veil is lifted and the world appears as chaos, the question is no longer, how do I escape it? But what can I make with it? His challenge is existential. Will you collapse under the weight of truth? Or will you create your own? This is where integration becomes vital. If you live only in Schopenhauer's world, you risk resignation. Life becomes a waiting room for death, an endless attempt to mute the pain without engaging the world. If you live only in Nietzsche's world, you risk burning out, mistaking constant striving for growth, mistaking pain for meaning when it hasn't been processed, transformed, or understood. But if you carry Schopenhauer's depth with Nietzsche's daring, something changes. You begin to see clearly and act bravely. You don't run from suffering, but you don't glorify it either. You recognize its presence, interrogate its function, and determine its value in your own life. For the modern individual, trapped between distraction and despair, this integration offers a rare kind of freedom. You can choose when to step back and when to step in, when to withdraw and observe, and when to throw yourself into the storm. This is not contradiction. It's maturity, the ability to hold opposing truths without being torn apart by them. Sometimes art is the answer. Sometimes action is. Sometimes you need silence. Sometimes you need to scream. The wise path isn't passive or aggressive, it's adaptive, rooted in awareness, guided by meaning, and forged in the furnace of lived experience. To suffer well, to see clearly, to respond creatively. That is the fusion of Schopenhauer and Nietzsche, not as saints, not as saviors, but as strange companions walking beside us, through the dark, through the fire, towards something we might one day call freedom. Schopenhauer taught us how to endure the weight of existence. Nietzsche taught us how to dance under it. Both remind us that suffering is not optional, but how we carry it is. To see clearly and still choose meaning. to feel deeply and still act boldly. That is the task of the modern soul. When the world becomes unbearable, remember, withdrawal isn't always weakness, and engagement isn't always strength. There is wisdom in silence, and there is truth in action. You are allowed to pause. You are allowed to roar. Schopenhauer invites us to look inward, to step back from the endless machinery of desire, to quiet the will, and find stillness in beauty and compassion. His vision is not a rejection of life, but a refusal to be enslaved by it. Nietzsche, in contrast, calls us to face the chaos and shape it. He teaches that we are not here to escape the fire, but to become forged by it, to transform pain into power and suffering into authorship. The aim is not escape or conquest, but transformation. To suffer consciously, to live deliberately, to build something honest in the ruins. Thank you for walking this path with me tonight. Until next time, seek beauty in stillness and meaning in motion.